Hello everybody! Today I'm going to do a video that's going to be a little bit out of character for what I generally talk about, and that's mainly because I've had an interesting conversation recently with somebody, and I have some information that I think is kind of unusual information. We live in a time now where you can find out just about anything on the internet, and this is something I've had a question about for a long time, but oddly enough, despite searching Google, etc., I really haven't found any adequate answers, and after this conversation I actually have something new to add to the conversation. About a week ago, I spoke to a guy who was a flat earther. Not just a flat earther, but he's a guy who's a fairly prominent in that community, actually. And he's actually fairly good and experienced at the scientific or pseudoscientific or whatever you want to call it arguments for the flat earth. And that's not what I want to do. That's not what I want to work on. That's been done to death by everybody on YouTube. Now, my background is not in physical sciences. I'm not going to talk about that aspect of things. My background is in psychology, and I want to talk about some of the sociological and psychological elements of this theory. Now, don't get me wrong. I do find some of the flat earther theories and explanations about things like distance for airplane travel and such like that to be interesting. I'm not saying I believe them, I'm saying it's interesting. But there is an element of it that I find particularly interesting, which is almost never addressed. What I'm talking about is motivation. Let's work under the assumption for just a little bit, if we can, that the flat earth conspiracy is true. I'm not talking about that. We're going to talk about it would have to be a conspiracy, would it not? Nearly every flat earth advocate I've ever looked into has agreed that the flat earth reality, that they call it, is well known to people in certain scientific circles, and it is systematically suppressed. So that brings us to that very important question: why on earth would anybody go through that amount of effort to suppress knowledge? What's their motivation? What's their drive? What's the benefit? What is the payout for keeping this grand secret for this long? I was actually really excited to be able to ask this very knowledgeable person this question. You would think the question of motivation would be central to any conspiracy theory. And in retrospect, I have to admit I am very disappointed in the answer I got. In all honesty, I was hoping for some new kind of Illuminati conspiracy or something that would have been interesting that I could sink my teeth into. What I got was trash. After finally getting into this and finally being able to find the answer, here's what I got. Reason number one for the vast conspiracy was to protect the Big Bang Theory. Basically, there is a schism between the religious community and the scientific community, and the scientific community really wants the Big Bang Theory to be the accepted theory, even though according to them, they know it's not true. So what their motivation is for pressing this theory that they know to be false, I have no idea. We're essentially back to the same incoherency that we began with. The second explanation as to why is that the flat earthers believe, at least this particular flat earther believes, that the world as we know it is this circular pocket of space, of land mass, of water, or whatever, you know. But it's not the only one. There are others. Essentially, Earth as we know it is one pocket that might be parallel to other pockets on the same plane, and that this is more land and thus more resources, and that this grand conspiracy is keeping this all secret because of the more land that they can somehow exploit, possibly somehow down the line in some unknowable way for reasons. And so I asked him, are they exploiting those now? And he said no. So have they been exploiting them for the last 2,000 years? And he says no. So I'll get back to that in a second. So anyhow, let's start kind of deconstructing some of these ideas and the whole conspiracy, because that's what I want to talk about in terms of motivation. In any kind of a thing like this, like a conspiracy or anything like this, we have to keep in mind the cost-benefit analysis. What is the cost of investment to keep something like this going, and what is the payout for it? So I want to address this conspiracy theory from that perspective. So if we want to do any kind of analysis like that, we have to start going back to looking at when the conspiracy began. So we're talking about asking ourselves the historical question of when people start to believe that the Earth was in fact a sphere. Or, spheroid, you know what I mean. Now, as much as the flat earthers would like us to think that the idea of a spherical world is new, the fact of the matter is that's not necessarily so. There's the common misconception that we like to think that when Columbus first sailed that he thought that the world was flat. But in fact, we know that's not true. We know that Columbus knew very well that the Earth was a sphere. As a matter of fact, we have very good reason to believe that even the Greeks knew how big the Earth was. They had calculated how big Earth was, even calculated pretty well how much the damn thing weighed. Most scholars today believe that the Greeks figured it out right around 250 BC. So we're going to round that out to right around 2,250 years is how long we're talking about this knowledge has been in general circulation. But from the Flat Earthers' point of view, we're talking about 2,250 years of conspiracy. Somehow, for some reason, 2,250 years ago, the Greeks decided to perpetrate upon the people of Earth a conspiracy to convince them that the Earth was in fact a different shape than it really was. Thus, we must logically ask ourselves, what on earth would the Greeks have wanted 2,250 years ago that people today would still want? Why would people 2 millennia later continue to conspire with the ancient Greeks? Now, in assessing the scope of the conspiracy, we have a time frame. Now let's talk about people. How many people are we talking about? Now, I suppose that we can easily say that throughout history, controlling information was easier. A handful of academics made it. However, in more modern times, that scope becomes much more broad. Now, I suppose it's possible to go back and talk about this from various points in human history, but to be honest, that's beyond the scope of what I want to get into. I want to focus on, let's say, maybe the past 50 years or so. So, in the relatively modern world, what types of people would have to have been involved in this conspiracy and decided to keep it quiet rather than to talk about the truth of the flat earth? Let's start with the most obvious. People involved in transportation and shipping. Clearly, we're not talking about people on rail or in highways and truck drivers, but what we are talking about is pretty much everybody in maritime or airliner-based transportation and the industries surrounding those. Now, speculating how many people in those various industries would be in or not in on the conspiracy, complicated to guesstimate, but we would have to assume that at least a percentage of people in those fields would have to be in the know. Now, I suppose the next obvious bogeyman we can talk about is NASA. Alright, so we're going to have to assume that NASA is complicit in this conspiracy, or even behind it, as most of them suspect. So we have a bunch of people in aerospace engineering, astrophysics, astronomy, and those types of disciplines that all come together in NASA. So essentially we're talking about probably a plurality of the people at NASA. But that brings us into a whole other field, telecommunications. We live in a world that is permeated by telecommunications technology. And the background of telecommunications are satellites, geosync-sats. Assuming the flat earthers are right, there is no outer space, there is some kind of a dome. Gravity works completely differently than we believe, and these satellites that are in orbit would have to be placed there in some type of radically different manner. So in essence, the people who designed the satellites and the method of keeping them in place had to invent this miraculous technology not once but twice. They had to invent it a real way that actually worked with the flat world with the dome, and a secondary fake way that worked within the laws of physics that are commonly known by the general population. Let's go back about 50 years. About 50 years ago, we had this big thing called World War II. Now, the interesting thing about world wars is that they engulf the entirety of the world. Well, you know what I mean, not all of it, but they're pretty spread out. Lots of countries involved from all over the place. So, that in mind, we have various levels of people in the military and the service. Not just our service, but every service in the world, essentially, who is concerned about getting troops and units and supplies where they need to be. And we're not just talking about people in the service. We're talking about countless private corporations and businesses that help in supplying these various militaries. The logistics for a worldwide confrontation are incredible. Add into the mix not just trying to win a war for your country, a desperate battle for your nation's survival, and then you want to throw into that the complexity of keeping secret the fact that the trade routes don't work because the world is a completely different shape. It's absurd. But let's pretend that absurdly difficult is still possible. And again, we're not talking about just our military. We're talking about the military of countless countries, the corporations and businesses and industries of countless other countries, all with competing interests. What secret or benefit or payout would be so fantastic, so beneficial, so marvelous, that nations attempting to eradicate one another would cooperate to keep this secret. Okay, fine. Perhaps that's an incorrect characterization. You could simply say that they were all keeping the secret for their own benefit and they weren't cooperating with each other. Fine. At what point does a country have to be up against the ropes and on the verge of loss to say, screw it, I'm not going to bother keeping this conspiracy anymore. It's just not worth it because my country's about to get blown up. I'm just going to eschew with that type of conspiracy and get rid of that overhead so that I can get to the business of trying to keep my country from dying. The promise of alternative pockets of Earth don't really live up to that. Look at the lengths, for instance, the Nazis went to conquer Africa for the sake of exploiting resources there. If there were these other pockets of Earth, or alternative Earths, or separate Earths, or whatever you want to call it, that could have been exploited for extra land and extra territory and resources, do you think the Nazis would have bothered with Africa if they had these other alternative spaces at their disposal? If they would have had them at their disposal, they would have used them. If they were not at their disposal, why would they have lost the war when they could have been exploiting those instead? Why would they have kept the secret, even as Berlin was falling? Hell, let's talk about Japan for a second. The main reason Japan was in the war in the first place was for resources. If you're going to start questioning some of the fundamentals about this flat Earth motivation, it destroys any type of historical narrative for motivation for why countries have done things. Nothing in history begins to make sense anymore. Let's talk for a minute about the religious element of this. According to many of the flat earthers, there is essentially a scientific conspiracy against the religious community. They paint the religious community as the victims of this conspiracy. Basically, that creationism is real and that the scientists are using this secret knowledge to suppress the more faith-based ideas about the creation of the world and the universe that we see presented in the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Vedas, and such like that. Now, in the modern day, it might be possible to make a coherent argument that an academic community might have some desire to suppress a religious community. I doubt it, but maybe we can make that argument. From a historical standpoint, however, it is absolute nonsense. The fact of the matter is that through the medieval period, the church was academia. The church held incredible power and sway over governments. There's no way on earth that you can make a coherent argument that in some way the church was repressible in the medieval period. In fact, very good arguments have been made that the church did a pretty good job suppressing the scientific community. The idea that there may be a distinctly provable way to show that biblical accounts of the creation are in fact truthful would not be overlooked by the church. If you could get your happy ass onto a boat and sail out into the ocean to a big wall of ice that turns into the sky, that would be on every news channel 24/7. The church would never have taken a pass on that. The church would absolutely have to be involved in the conspiracy. To what end? So, I guess we have to add religious historians and theologians into the mix of people involved in the conspiracy. This might be a good time to bring up the cosmic egg theory, also known as the primeval atom, also known as the very first speculation about the Big Bang, which was, of course, brought to us by a Catholic priest. In all honest actuality, the church itself was one of the most original supporters of the idea of Big Bang. It got its start with a Catholic priest, a French Catholic priest whose name I can't pronounce, right around 1925. But wait a second, you may say if you're astute. The Big Bang theory did not exist in anything but its most basic beginning form until 1925. And yet the conspiracy to counteract it began in 225 BC? There's a dead end. We're honestly talking about a 2,000-year-old conspiracy that has been kept going for 2 millennia to counteract a theory that hadn't begun yet. Think about that for a second. Anyhow, this is beginning to sound colossally expensive to me. Now, let's assume that not only are the co-conspirators involved in the conspiracy, but there also has to be another level of co-conspirators of people who are coercing the conspirators to stay in line. Where is the funding and financing for this coming from? Who on earth would make this 2,000-year investment? The civilization that first came up with this is gone. Now, all the scientific evidence aside, for all of the bizarrely interesting arguments that flat earthers can make from a scientific point of view, a pseudoscientific point of view, whatever you want to call it, about how they can explain away things that we typically experience to be normal, the motivation, the psychological end of this makes no sense whatsoever. Even if they can talk about alternative flight plans and navigational routes, that's fine and dandy, but the prime thing that any conspiracy has to be built on is not there, and that's the motivation, that's the reason why, and it's absent. If you want to make the argument that an American Airlines pilot might know but is keeping quiet because he's got a great 100K a year job, fine, I'll buy that. But why does American Airlines do it? What would be in it for them? I suppose that you could come up with something, but what you ultimately have to keep getting down to is somebody is coercing somebody who is coercing somebody who is coercing somebody for reasons utterly unknown that make no sense. And somebody is paying that bill. Let me close with this. In all honesty, I would have been much more compelled by a fantastic, fanciful answer like space aliens run the world than this bizarrely vapid explanation as to why this might be the case. I have seen some good conspiracy theories in my time, but this one just is uninteresting at this point because, quite frankly, there's no meat to it. The idea of the scientists having a grudge against the religious community is just silly. Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face? This explanation as to the motivation for the conspiracy essentially says that scientists would rather forsake science altogether and do fake science, making shit up in a weird, bizarre, theatrical performance for the sake of pissing off the Christians. They would have given up doing actual scientific inquiry instead to write fiction. Fiction that is plausible within the context of fiction they've already written, but fiction nonetheless. This theory requires that the scientists who are involved would rather be fantasy authors than researchers and investigators. Hell, if they're perpetrating this grand conspiracy, they're not even scientists. They're just an alternative competing religion. They're a theology. And the idea that there's extra land out there, so what? Who cares? It doesn't make any sense. It's not valuable. It's a meaningless explanation. When this conspiracy began, the ancient Greeks had all the land they could ever wanted. The world was an expanse of useless land. They could have put colonies down anywhere they wanted to. And they did, by the way. What they cared about conquering was other civilizations that had stuff built up, educated people, buildings, crops, etc. Back then, people to conquest and exploit were useful. Empty land, they already had access to that. They didn't need it. Empty, undeveloped, useless land was empty, undeveloped, and useless. That already existed in abundance in the ancient world. There is absolutely no reason to suggest that an ancient people like the Greeks would have to come up with a conspiracy to keep secret empty, useless land. There's also no reason to believe that they should come up with a theory that is going to counter another theory that won't exist for another 2,000 years. This is just silliness. At its very core, there is nothing here. Alright guys, that's enough for me. Have a good day. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.